It all began on a night that was supposed to be just another glamorous charity gala for the city's elite, a night of champagne, glittering gowns, and polite conversations about fortunes and fads. But for one man, that night would become the stage for a story no one would ever forget. A billionaire's careless words, meant as nothing more than a cruel joke, would spark a chain of events that would shatter arrogance, restore dignity, and capture the attention of millions. "Play that piano better than a professional," she mocked, "and I'll marry you." The crowd laughed. She thought it was just entertainment at someone else's expense. She had no idea she had just challenged the wrong man. Before I take you into the heart of this unbelievable story, if you love powerful tales of unexpected twists and life-changing moments, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Twists of Life. There are more stories like this, and every one of them will stay with you long after they end. The Grand Hotel lobby shimmered under golden light, its polished marble floors reflecting the glow of towering crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp white gloves floated between tables, draped in flawless white linen, carrying silver trays lined with champagne flutes. Conversations drifted through the air, whispers of business deals, vacation homes, and art collections, worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. In the midst of it all, a navy blue uniform moved quietly along the edges of the room. Roberto Mendez, 30 years old, pushed his cleaning cart down the side corridor, collecting empty glasses and tidying forgotten corners. He knew these events well. 5 years working in the hotel had taught him the art of being invisible. To the wealthy, people like him didn't exist, and for the most part he preferred it that way. The fewer eyes on him, the fewer problems. But that night, something felt different. As he stepped into the main hall to retrieve a few stray glasses, he couldn't help but notice the sheer spectacle before him. Golden floral arrangements stood like proud sentinels on every table. A sleek black grand piano waited silently at the far end of the room, its polished surface gleaming under the lights like a mirror. Roberto moved quietly, careful not to disturb the rhythm of the evening. No one noticed the man behind the cart. No one except the woman who was about to change everything. The atmosphere shifted the moment she walked in. Valentina Montero, 30 years old, heir to a vast empire of hotels, construction companies, and investments scattered across the country, entered as if she owned not just the room, but the entire world. In a way, she did. Her crimson silk gown clung perfectly to her figure, the deep color a deliberate contrast to her dark hair, pinned into an impeccable chignon. Diamonds sparkled at her neck and wrists, each piece worth more than most families' homes. Cameras followed her every step, flashes reflecting off the polished floor. She was the evening's main sponsor, though not out of compassion. For her, charity events were obligations, a necessary show of generosity to maintain her public image. Donating a few thousand was a small price to pay for keeping her name glittering in the headlines. She drifted through the crowd, greeting influential guests with a smile so practiced it could have been painted on. Her laughter, loud, sharp, and slightly too long, carried easily over the music and clinking glasses. Every move was deliberate, every gesture calculated. From his corner of the room, Roberto watched her weave through the sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. He knew the type. He'd seen it before. Wealth worn like armor, power wielded like a weapon. And though their worlds couldn't have been more different, their paths were about to collide in a way neither could have imagined. Roberto bent down to pick up a champagne glass that had rolled under a nearby table. The music swelled softly in the background. Laughter rippled across the hall, and for a moment he was invisible again. Until he wasn't. Valentina, lost in animated conversation and grand gestures, took a careless step backward. Her heel caught the edge of the rug, and her arm jolted. The glass of golden champagne in her hand tilted, spilling a shimmering cascade across the crimson silk of her gown. She froze, then slowly turned toward him. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened. "What on earth have you done?" she hissed, loud enough to slice through the background chatter. Every head in the room seemed to swivel in their direction. Roberto straightened, his heart pounding. "I'm so sorry, Mom. It was an accident." She cut him off, her voice climbing an octave. "You ruined my dress. Do you even know how much this costs? More than you'll make in 10 years of scrubbing floors." The words hung in the air like a cruel echo. Laughter began to bubble from nearby tables, quiet at first, then bolder. Several guests pulled out their phones, recording. "I'll pay for the cleaning," Roberto offered, his voice small but steady. She laughed, cold, sharp, without an ounce of humor. "With what? Your janitor's paycheck?" The circle of onlookers tightened. Roberto felt the burn of humiliation creep up his neck, but somewhere deep inside, something else began to stir. Something that wouldn't stay buried for long. Valentina turned to the crowd, relishing the attention as if the moment were part of a performance designed solely for her amusement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice dripping with mockery, "this man is the perfect example of people who were born to be invisible, to clean up after others, not to stand among real people." A few guests chuckled, others smirked. Roberto lowered his gaze, the heat of shame pressing against his chest. Then Valentina's eyes landed on the grand piano at the far end of the room. A sly, dangerous smile curved across her lips. "You know what? Let's make this fun. If you can play that piano better than a professional, I'll marry you." The room erupted in laughter. Glasses clinked. Someone whispered, "This is going to be good." Valentina clapped her hands in mock delight. "Come on, everyone, the janitor is going to give us a concert." Roberto looked at her, then at the piano, then back again. Something in her tone, the absolute certainty that he would fail, lit a spark inside him. "You're not going to," she continued with a smirk, "because people like you don't understand music or culture or refinement. Leave those things to those of us who do." The smirks around the circle deepened. Some guests began to turn away, assuming the show was already over. But Roberto's eyes remained on the piano, and the spark in them was growing brighter. For years, Roberto had perfected the art of silence, discreet, efficient, unseen. It was easier that way. But now, something inside him refused to stay quiet. "I accept," he said, his voice low but clear. The laughter around him stumbled into silence. Valentina blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What did you just say?" "I said I accept. I'll play the piano." Her laughter came back in a rush, sharp and ringing like glass shattering. "Oh, this is going to be even better than I thought." Phones rose higher in the air, guests eager to capture the humiliation they were certain was coming. Valentina's grin widened. "All right then, show us what you've got." In fact, she reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a thick wallet. 500 reis if you can play an entire song without a mistake." From the back, a voice called out, "Make it 1,000 if he doesn't run away in the first 30 seconds. More laughter, cruel and careless. Roberto straightened his shoulders. "I don't want your money." Valentina tilted her head, mock curiosity in her eyes. "Then what do you want?" "For you to keep your word," he replied, locking eyes with her for the first time that night. The air in the room tightened. Guests exchanged glances. No one was laughing now. They wanted to see what this man could do. Roberto walked toward the grand piano, each step feeling heavier than the last, as though he were moving through water. The crowd parted, creating a narrow aisle for him. Some smirked, others whispered, but all eyes followed his every move. The instrument was magnificent, a black Steinway & Sons Model D, its polished surface gleaming under the chandeliers. He rested his hand on the smooth wood for a moment, almost as if greeting an old friend. Valentina's voice cut through the air. "What are you waiting for? Divine inspiration?" Roberto turned his head toward her, his expression calm, almost unsettlingly so. "What song would you like to hear?" Her eyebrows lifted. She hadn't expected that. "Play anything. Happy Birthday should be enough for you." Laughter trickled through the room again, but softer this time. He sat down on the leather bench, adjusted his posture, and placed his fingers gently on the keys. For a heartbeat, the world around him disappeared. He was no longer in a glittering ballroom filled with hostile stares. He was back in the small conservatory of his youth, his teacher's voice in his ear. "Feel the music, Roberto. Don't think about the keys. Feel the music." He opened his eyes, looked directly at Valentina, and said softly, "This one's for you." The first notes rose into the air like a gentle wave, pure and perfectly placed. The sound wrapped around the room, silencing even the faintest murmur. The laughter died. Even the waiters stopped moving. At first, it was a tune everyone recognized. Simple, familiar, easy enough that no one could be too impressed. But within moments, subtle changes began to weave their way in. His fingers added delicate harmonies, unexpected variations, and a rhythm that breathed life into every note. The melody deepened, expanding into something richer, more complex. Each chord rang out with precision, yet carried an emotion so raw it seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the heart. Conversations stopped entirely. Guests leaned forward without realizing it, drawn in by the invisible thread of his music. Roberto's posture was confident but unpretentious, his hands moving with a grace that spoke of years of discipline. The transformation was undeniable. What began as a light exercise had become a living, breathing work of art. Valentina's smirk faltered. She felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the room. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to play like this. Roberto's eyes stayed on the keys, his focus absolute. It was as if every ounce of himself, every year of silence, every unspoken word was pouring into the music. And the more he played, the more the crowd forgot their initial amusement, because what they were witnessing was no longer a joke. As the final chord of the piece faded into the air, the silence that followed was thick, almost reverent. Then, like a spark catching flame, applause erupted, not the polite kind expected at social gatherings, but the raw, involuntary clapping of people who had been truly moved. Through the sea of faces, one man stepped forward. Distinguished, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that drew attention without effort. Roberto recognized him instantly. A famed music critic whose reviews could launch or destroy entire careers. "I haven't heard an interpretation of that quality in years," the man said, his voice carrying easily over the applause. "Where did you study?" Roberto hesitated for a beat, the weight of the question heavy in his chest. "The National Conservatory," he answered simply. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. The National Conservatory was an institution reserved for the most gifted talents in the country. The revelation shifted the room's perception. This was no ordinary janitor. Then, from the back, an older woman's voice rose. "I remember him. Roberto Mendez, the pianist." Heads turned to see the hotel's longtime housekeeper, eyes glistening. She had worked there for over 2 decades and knew more secrets than anyone guessed. And just like that, the story everyone thought they were watching began to change entirely. All eyes shifted to the housekeeper as she stepped forward, her voice steady but heavy with memory. "Roberto stopped playing 5 years ago," she said. "It was right after his parents died in a car accident." A soft wave of murmurs swept the room. Roberto kept his gaze on the piano, but the ache in his chest returned with full force. "They gave everything they had to pay for his studies," she continued, "but when they passed, he found out they were drowning in debt. He sold everything, even his piano, to pay the creditors, and he walked away from music entirely." Some guests lowered their eyes, others glanced at Valentina, whose once proud stance seemed to shrink. "He didn't stop just because of the money," the housekeeper added. Every note reminded him of his parents. Playing was like reopening the wound. For a moment the room felt different. The judgment, the laughter, the superiority, all replaced by a quiet, almost uncomfortable respect. Even Valentina's expression had shifted, her arrogance cracked by something unfamiliar. Guilt. Roberto finally looked up, his voice low but firm. "I didn't want pity. I just wanted to work in peace and rebuild my life far away from all of this." But in that moment, it was clear to everyone. The man they had dismissed was carrying far more than a janitor's cart. If you've been moved even a little by what you've heard so far, take a moment right now. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that every person carries a story. Stories of struggle, of resilience, of dignity. By sharing, you're helping more people see that value isn't defined by a title, a paycheck, or the clothes someone wears, but by the strength of their character. And who knows, Maybe this story will change the way someone treats the people around them. Now, let's return to the moment that would put Valentina face to face with the very promise she never thought she'd have to keep. The murmurs in the room grew louder as memories of Valentina's bold challenge replayed in everyone's minds. The critic's words still hung in the air. He doesn't just play better than a professional, he is a professional. Guests began to turn toward her, eyes filled with expectation. Some smiled knowingly, others waited in silence, but the unspoken message was the same. Are you going to keep your word? Valentina's spine stiffened, though her pulse raced. It was a joke, she said, her tone sharper than intended. It didn't sound like a joke at the time, one guest replied. Another added, you said it in front of all of us. She looked around for an ally, but none came. The people who had once laughed with her now watched in quiet anticipation, eager to see if the woman who seemed untouchable would honor her promise. Roberto met her gaze, calm and unwavering. You told me you would marry me if I played better than a professional, and you've just been told I did. Her throat felt dry. The room, once hers to control, now belonged to him. And there was no escaping the weight of her own words. Roberto's eyes stayed on her, steady and unreadable. The crowd seemed to lean in, as if the very air between them held the answer to what would happen next. Then he spoke. Marriage is too serious to be decided by a bet, but you can still keep your word in a different way. A flicker of relief passed over her face, quickly masked by curiosity. What are you suggesting? Help me return to music, he said. Use your influence and resources to give me a chance to rebuild my career. In return, I'll teach you something money can't buy: humility, empathy, and the understanding that true greatness comes from how you treat others. A few gasps rippled through the room. No one had expected him to respond with anything but revenge. Valentina studied him for a long moment, torn between pride and the sudden realization that this was an opportunity she hadn't seen coming. Finally, she extended her hand. Deal. Their handshake wasn't just an agreement, it was the beginning of something neither of them could fully imagine yet. When they returned to the ballroom, conversations halted. All eyes turned toward them. Valentina stepped forward, the microphone trembling slightly in her hand. I owe someone here a sincere apology, she began, her voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Earlier tonight I treated Roberto as if he were invisible, as if his worth could be measured by his job title. I was wrong, very wrong. A hush settled over the crowd. She continued, I discovered that Roberto is not only an extraordinary musician, but a man who sacrificed his dreams for his family. That's a strength I wish I had. Tonight, I learned that dignity has nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with character. Roberto stood quietly at her side, his expression calm but resolute. As for my promise, she said, glancing briefly at him, we've reached an agreement. I will help him return to the music world, and he will teach me to see people for who they truly are, not for the roles they play. The room erupted in applause, not polite, but genuine. Even those who had laughed earlier were now moved by the transformation they had witnessed. Roberto stepped toward the grand piano once more. The crowd fell into silence, sensing that this moment was different from the one before. He sat down, placed his fingers gently on the keys, and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. This one is for all of us, for second chances, for the hope that we can always choose to be better. The first notes floated into the air, soft and deliberate. The melody grew, carrying with it the weight of everything that had happened that night: the cruelty, the humiliation, the courage, and the unexpected grace. Each chord seemed to bind the room together, strangers united by a single shared moment of humanity. Valentina stood beside the piano, no longer the untouchable heiress, but a woman humbled and willing to learn. Her eyes shimmered, though whether from the music or the lesson no one could say. When the last note faded, the applause was deafening. But for Roberto, the true victory wasn't in the clapping or the cheers. It was in knowing he had reclaimed his voice, his music, and his dignity, and had sparked change in someone who once saw him as invisible. If you've stayed with us until this moment, ask yourself, Have you liked, shared, and subscribed yet? If this story has touched your heart, do it now, and help us bring more tales of courage, redemption, and unexpected twists to the world. Because in the end, dignity doesn't wear a uniform. It lives in the courage to stand tall, even when the world tries to keep you small.